The morning was already heavy with heat when Danielle Harris parked her car outside a small cafe near the center of town. The air smelled faintly of roasted coffee and asphalt warming in the sun. She had just come from a meeting at City Hall, her first official appointment since transferring to the new precinct. The department had been struggling. Too many complaints, too much tension between officers and the community, and the mayor wanted someone steady, experienced, and respected to help rebuild it. That was her job now. Captain Danielle Harris, 20 years in uniform, known for her calm authority and quiet discipline. She wasn't in uniform that morning. Just jeans, a navy blouse, and sunglasses tucked into her hair. She liked blending in when she could. It gave her a clearer picture of the city she was about to serve. The cafe was busy. Students, construction workers, a few people in suits rushing with phones pressed to their ears. She ordered a coffee, smiled politely at the barista, and stepped back outside to sit on one of the benches lining the sidewalk. For a few peaceful minutes, she sipped her drink and watched the street come alive. A sudden commotion drew her attention. Across the street, a small group of people had gathered near the curb where a car was double parked. A man in uniform was standing beside it, his tone sharp, his posture loud. Even from where she sat, she recognized the body language instantly, one she'd seen too often from officers who believed control came from raising their voice instead of their awareness. Danielle stood slowly, setting her cup aside, and crossed the street. The closer she got, the clearer the scene became. The officer, mid-30s, tall with mirrored sunglasses and a tight jaw, was berating a young black woman who looked terrified. She was holding her phone in one hand, trying to explain herself, but the officer kept cutting her off. "I told you to step away from the vehicle," he barked. "I just needed to grab my wallet," the woman said softly. "I was gone for 2 minutes. Do you think I care?" He snapped. "You people think rules don't apply to you." The words hit like a slap. Several bystanders gasped quietly. The woman froze, eyes wide, her hand trembling as she lowered her phone. Danielle stopped a few steps away, her expression unreadable, the muscles in her jaw tightening. "Officer," she said calmly, "is there a reason you're raising your voice?" The man turned sharply, clearly annoyed. "Ma'am, stay back." "This is police business." "I can see that," she said evenly. "Doesn't seem like it's being handled very professionally." He sneered faintly. "And who exactly are you to decide that?" Danielle took one slow step forward, her eyes steady on his. "Someone who's asking you to lower your tone." The officer's mouth curled into a smirk. "Lady, do yourself a favor and keep walking. Don't interfere or you'll be the next one in cuffs," the crowd murmured, sensing the tension rising. The young woman glanced between them, her voice small. "Please, I didn't mean to cause trouble." Danielle didn't look at her. She kept her gaze fixed on the officer. "You've already caused enough trouble for both of you," she said quietly. That's when he made the mistake that would haunt him. With a scoff, he turned his head and spit on the ground near her shoes, not directly on her, but close enough to send a message. "There, you happy now? You can complain all you want." No one's listening. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the air seemed to still. Danielle looked down at the small dark spot on the pavement, then back up at him. Her expression didn't change, but her silence carried weight. The officer straightened, his smirk fading slightly. "What?" he said. "You gonna stare at me all day?" Danielle reached slowly into her bag, pulled out her leather badge holder and flipped it open. The sunlight caught the gold emblem perfectly, clean, sharp, unmistakable. "Actually," she said quietly, her voice calm but edged with steel, "I'm going to do more than that." She stepped closer until they were barely 3 feet apart. "I'll just spit at your new commanding officer." The officer blinked, confusion flickering before his face drained of color. What did you just say?" "Captain Danielle Harris," she said clearly. "Your new division head." The crowd collectively gasped. Someone muttered, "Oh my God," under their breath. Danielle held his gaze, every word measured. "I suggest you remove those sunglasses and address me properly, officer." He hesitated, then fumbled to take them off, his hands suddenly unsure. "Ma'am, I didn't know." "That's the problem," she said softly. "You never know who you're talking to. You only see what you want to see." The young woman who'd been harassed stood frozen, her eyes wide, still gripping her phone. Danielle turned to her, her tone instantly gentler. "You're free to go, miss. I'll handle this from here," The woman nodded shakily. "Thank you." She backed away slowly, her relief visible. Danielle waited until she was gone before turning back to the officer. The arrogance in his stance had completely dissolved. His face was pale, his voice unsteady. "Captain Harris." I didn't mean—" "Stop," she said quietly. "Don't make excuses. Report to my office at 8 tomorrow morning. Full uniform. And bring your badge." He nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am." She stepped back, her expression unreadable. "You've embarrassed this department in front of the public. You've disrespected the people you're supposed to protect. And you've disrespected me. I understand," he said weakly. "I doubt that," she replied. "But you will." She turned and walked away, the crowd parting silently as she passed. No one clapped. No one cheered. But every eye followed her, some in shock, others in awe, all aware they'd just witnessed something rare, a lesson in authority without a single raised voice. As she reached her car, she took one steady breath and looked down the street, where the officer still stood rooted to the spot, staring after her. He looked smaller now, stripped of the uniform's false power, left only with the weight of his actions. Danielle opened her car door, sat inside, and stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. She didn't feel triumphant, just tired. She'd spent her career teaching people like him what leadership truly meant, and she knew this was only the beginning. By the time morning arrived, the precinct buzzed with quiet tension. News of what had happened outside the cafe had already spread. No official reports, but whispers traveled faster than memos ever could. Everyone had heard some version of it. A new captain had publicly disciplined an officer in front of civilians. Some called it impossible. Others said it sounded exactly like something this department needed. Either way, by the time Captain Danielle Harris walked through the doors at 7:45 a.m., every officer in the building seemed to straighten a little taller. She moved through the hallway with quiet confidence, her uniform crisp, her badge polished to a shine. The desk sergeant, an older man with kind eyes, gave her a small nod. "Morning, Captain." "Morning, Sergeant," she replied. "Has Officer Barnes reported in yet?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Been sitting outside your office since 7:30. "Good," she said simply and kept walking. When she entered her office, Barnes shot to his feet so fast his chair nearly toppled over. He looked different than he had yesterday. Hair neatly combed, shoes polished, but his nerves showed in the tightness of his jaw and the stiffness in his posture. "Ma'am," he said quickly, "thank you for seeing me." Danielle closed the door behind her and motioned for him to sit. "You're early." "That's a start." He hesitated before sitting, hands clasped tightly in his lap. "I wanted to apologize," she interrupted, taking her seat across from him. "I'm sure you do. But before you do that, I want to make something very clear. What you did yesterday wasn't just disrespectful. It was dangerous." He swallowed hard. "I understand, ma'am." "No," she said quietly. "I don't think you do." She leaned forward slightly, her tone calm but unyielding. "When you lose control of your temper in public, you're not just embarrassing yourself. You're eroding trust. Every word, every gesture, every look you give in uniform reflects on this department. And when that reflection shows contempt instead of service, people stop calling us for help. They stop believing we protect them." Barnes stared at the floor, his voice small. "You're right, ma'am. I let my frustration take over. I didn't mean for it to come out that way." "Frustration," Danielle repeated softly. "You called a woman you people. You spit near her feet. That wasn't frustration. That was arrogance." He flinched. "Yes, ma'am." She sat back, letting the silence stretch for a moment. "How long have you been on the force?" 7 years, ma'am." 7 years, she echoed. "Long enough to know better. Long enough to remember that this badge doesn't make you powerful. It makes you responsible." He nodded, the shame visible now. "I don't have an excuse. I was out of line." Danielle studied him for a moment. He was nervous, yes, but she saw something else in his expression too, a flicker of realization, maybe even regret. That was something she could work with. "Officer Barnes," she said slowly, "do you know why I didn't suspend you immediately?" He hesitated. "No, ma'am, because suspension doesn't teach accountability. It just hides it." She stood and walked toward the window, looking out at the city below. "You humiliated someone in public yesterday, so that's where you'll start fixing it, in public." He looked up, unsure what she meant. "Ma'am? You're going to spend the next 4 weekends working community patrol. Not enforcement, assistance. You'll volunteer at neighborhood events, food drives, anything that lets you face the people you serve outside of a uniform's authority. He frowned slightly. Community service? Community exposure, she corrected. You'll learn to listen instead of lecture. You'll help instead of intimidate, he nodded slowly. Yes, ma'am. I'll be there for some of it, she added. Not as your boss, but as your example. If you're willing to do the work, I'll give you a chance to earn back the respect you lost. For the first time, his voice steadied. I am willing. I don't want that to be the kind of officer I am. Danielle nodded once. Then prove it. Starting now. She moved to her desk and handed him a folder. Inside was a short report she'd written about the incident, not to punish him, but to document the change she expected. He glanced at it, then looked back at her. You're not filing a formal complaint? I don't need to ruin your career to make a point, she said. But make no mistake, if it ever happens again, there will be no conversation, no meeting, no second chance. Yes, ma'am, he said firmly. Good, she replied. Now get out there. You've got work to do. Barnes stood, saluted awkwardly, and turned to leave. As he reached the door, Danielle spoke again. One more thing. He turned back. When you put that uniform on, remember, it's not the people out there who owe you respect. It's you who owes it to them first. He nodded, quieter this time. Understood. When he left, Danielle sat back and exhaled slowly. The office was silent again, sunlight streaming across her desk. She picked up the folder he'd left behind, his personnel file, and read through his record, commendations for bravery, solid performance reviews, even a few letters of thanks from residents. He wasn't a bad cop, just one who'd forgotten what the uniform stood for. Later that afternoon, as she walked through the station, several officers greeted her more respectfully than the day before. Word had spread that the new captain wasn't just tough, she was fair. She didn't humiliate, but she didn't tolerate disrespect either. That evening, as she locked her office, she saw Barnes outside, loading boxes into a patrol car. Few community volunteers were helping him, and though he looked uncomfortable, he was smiling, awkwardly but sincerely. Danielle stopped for a moment, watching from a distance. She didn't need to say anything. Some lessons didn't need repetition. They needed time. As the sun dipped low, she stepped into her car and drove away, the city glowing orange in the fading light. Another day, another small step forward. Change didn't happen through speeches. It happened through moments like these. One officer, one attitude, one act at a time. The next few weeks passed quietly but steadily, the city beginning to take notice of the change filtering through the department. Danielle didn't make speeches or issue sweeping reforms overnight. She believed in leading from the ground, not from the headlines. She rotated shifts so every officer, from the newest recruit to the veterans, spent time on foot patrol in neighborhoods they rarely entered. She sat in on community meetings, not to talk but to listen. Slowly, the tension between residents and officers began to loosen, replaced with cautious acknowledgement that something was different. For Officer Barnes, every day of that change felt personal. He reported early, took assignments without complaint, and did exactly what Danielle had ordered. Showed up where people needed help, not authority. He helped repaint a community center's exterior, directed traffic for a charity marathon, and even spent a Saturday handing out school supplies to kids. The first few times people recognized him from that morning on the street, their looks wary, their trust tentative. But Danielle had been right. Facing the community instead of hiding behind a desk was forcing him to see things differently. One Saturday morning, he and Danielle worked together at a neighborhood cleanup event. It was humid, the kind of heat that clung to skin and clothing, but the energy around them was good. Dozens of volunteers moved up and down the block with trash bags, chatting and laughing. Barnes was hauling an old tire into a dumpster when Danielle approached, sleeves rolled up, gloves on, her uniform cap pulled low against the sun. "How's it going?" she asked. He wiped his forehead. "I've done more manual labor in the last 2 weeks than in my entire career," she smiled faintly. "Good for you. Builds character." He chuckled quietly. "I think it's rebuilding it in my case." She tilted her head, studying him. "How's your perspective holding up?" He leaned against the dumpster, serious now. "You were right, Captain. I used to walk into calls thinking everyone out here was a problem waiting to happen. Now I see most of them are just trying to live their lives, and they notice everything. Every gesture, every tone, every time we treat them like they don't belong." Danielle nodded, pleased. "You learning that from the seminars?" He shook his head. "From watching you. You don't talk at people, you talk to them. I didn't realize how much that matters until I started trying it." She looked at him for a moment, then said quietly, "You can't lead anyone you don't respect, Barnes. Remember that," he nodded genuinely. "I will." By the end of the event, the sun was setting, streaking gold across the skyline. Kids were playing on the sidewalks, volunteers were packing up supplies, and the air smelled faintly of barbecue from a nearby park. Danielle stood off to the side, taking it all in. This was what leadership meant to her. Not press conferences, not polished reports, but moments like this, when trust slowly started to regrow where it had been broken. She turned when she heard Barnes's voice behind her. "Captain?" She looked over her shoulder. "I wanted to say, thank you," he said quietly. "Not just for giving me another chance, but for making me face what I did instead of burying it." Danielle smiled softly. "You don't owe me thanks, officer. Just keep showing up for people who don't expect you to." He nodded, and for the first time there was no tension in his voice. "I will." When she drove home that night, the streets felt different. Not safer exactly, but more connected. She passed a patrol car idling at a red light. 2 officers inside waved when they recognized her, and she nodded back, smiling faintly. It was small, but it meant something. The next Monday morning, the mayor stopped by the station unannounced. Danielle met him in the hallway outside her office, surprised to see him carrying a newspaper. "Captain Harris," he said, smiling broadly, "I think you should see this." He handed her the paper. On the front page was a photo from the cleanup event, Barnes and Danielle standing side by side, handing a bag of supplies to a young girl. The headline read, "New Captain's Approach to Policing Rebuilds Trust on the Streets." Danielle raised an eyebrow. "You didn't plan this, did you?" The mayor laughed. "I wish I could take credit. A reporter was there volunteering. Wrote the piece herself." She skimmed the article. It wasn't sensational. It didn't mention the cafe or the confrontation, just the slow, steady work of rebuilding a department's relationship with its people. It quoted a local resident who said, "It feels different this time. They're listening." The mayor smiled. "You've done in a few weeks what some couldn't do in years." Danielle handed the paper back. "We've started something. But real change doesn't happen in headlines. It happens when they stop needing to write about it." He nodded. "That's why I wanted you here." After he left, Danielle stood by the window looking out over the city again. The sky was a pale blue, sunlight catching the edges of buildings. Down on the street, she could see patrol cars moving slowly through traffic, officers walking alongside kids on their way to school, chatting easily. It was ordinary, but it looked right. She thought back to that morning outside the cafe, the crowd, the tension, the silence after she'd revealed who she was. She hadn't wanted humiliation. She'd wanted understanding. And now, standing here, she could finally see the beginning of it. Sometimes leadership wasn't about authority. It was about humanity, the kind that made even the hardest people stop and look at themselves honestly. The day of the department's quarterly briefing arrived 3 weeks later. It was one of those long, formal meetings where every division gathered in the main hall. Rows of uniforms lined up, brass polished, chatter subdued. The kind of day most officers treated like a formality. But this time the air felt different. There was a quiet energy, a sense of awareness that hadn't existed before. Captain Danielle Harris walked to the podium at the front, her steps unhurried, her presence steady. The sound in the room dimmed the moment she took her place. Behind her, the department's emblem glimmered on the wall. In front of her, the men and women she'd sworn to lead sat waiting. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm but carrying easily. "Before we get into reports and updates, I want to talk about something more important, something that isn't in your folders or charts." The room stayed still. "When I came here, I heard the same words I've heard in every department that's lost its way. We're understaffed. We're overworked. People don't respect us anymore." She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the room. "But here's the truth. Respect isn't something you lose. It's something you forget how to earn." The words hung in the air, quiet but sharp. "I've watched this department change in small ways over the last few weeks," she continued. "Officers staying after shifts to help at food drives. Others walking their beats instead of patrolling from a distance. People starting conversations instead of ending them with warnings. That's where trust begins, on the ground in the smallest choices you make when nobody's watching. Her gaze settled briefly on Officer Barnes, sitting near the middle of the room. He met her eyes just long enough to understand that she was talking to everyone, but also in some quiet way to him. "I don't expect perfection," she said softly. "I expect awareness. I expect compassion. And I expect courage, the kind that looks like restraint, not control." The room was silent now, every word hitting deeper than a raised voice ever could. "Uniforms can make us feel untouchable," she continued. "But the real strength of this job isn't in being untouchable. It's in being accountable. If the people we serve can't trust our humanity, then our authority means nothing." She let that last line rest for a moment, then nodded. That's all. No one clapped, but they didn't need to. There was something more genuine in the way officers shifted forward slightly, listening harder than they had before. After the meeting, several officers stopped by her office, not to talk about cases or assignments, but to thank her quietly. It wasn't flattery. It was gratitude. They knew she had changed the tone of the place without tearing it apart. When the last officer left, Danielle found herself standing by her office window again, looking down at the street. The city pulsed with life, cars moving, people crossing intersections, the kind of ordinary movement that reminded her why she'd taken this job in the first place. A soft knock on the door made her turn. Barnes stepped in out of uniform, carrying a file. "Captain," he said, "I finished the last report you requested. Thought I'd deliver it personally?" She nodded, taking the folder. "How's the community patrol going?" He smiled faintly. "Different now. People recognize me. Some even ask how I'm doing." "That didn't used to happen," she returned the smile. "That's because they see effort. Effort earns trust." He hesitated, then said, "Captain, I've been thinking a lot about what happened that day. I know I'll never live it down completely, but I just want you to know I won't waste the chance you gave me." "I don't want you to forget it," she replied. "I want you to remember it every time you put that badge on. That memory is your anchor." He nodded quietly. "Understood." She extended her hand and he shook it. No awkwardness this time, no pretense, just mutual respect. When he left, she glanced down at the folder, then out the window again. Outside, the late afternoon sun washed the city in warm gold. She could see a patrol car parked by the corner store where she sometimes stopped for coffee. The officer inside chatting easily with a group of kids on bikes. It was a small scene, but it said everything about why she did this work. Danielle leaned against the frame of her office door for a moment, taking in the quiet hum of the precinct. There would still be bad days, she knew. There would still be resistance, mistakes, and old habits to break. But change had started. Real change. The kind that grew from humility and respect, not policy. She reached into her pocket, ran her thumb across the cool metal of her badge, and smiled faintly. Every officer thought they carried authority because of the badge, but she'd spent her life proving that true power came from what you did before you showed it.